Welcome to the Catering Feed, the Catering Growth Podcast, a show about growing your catering business and restaurant industry trends, powered by EasyCater. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Catering Feed. This is Genevieve Babineau, your host, and I am delighted to be here today with Nicole and Susan from Sabert Corporation. Hi, ladies. How are you?
Hi, Genevieve.
Hi, thanks for having us.
We have been so excited to dig into a packaging episode for a while because it is such a crucial part of off-premises and specifically catering when you're creating that really phenomenal experience for your guests. And it's a really exciting time in packaging, if you ask me. So we are so happy that you ladies are here today. I would love for you to tell us a little bit more about what makes Sabert really special and also more insight on your careers.
I'm Nicole Buck. I'm the Vice President of Food Service Sales for Sabert Corporation North America. So we have a team of about 38 people across US and Canada, and we focus on helping operators extend the dining experience outside the four walls into catering and takeout. And I have been in the food service industry for about 20 years, and mostly on the packaging side throughout food service industry and national accounts.
Hi, Susan Beaudry. I'm the Senior Director of Marketing with Sabert Corporation North America. And I work here at the corporate office, helping to support the sales team in their efforts with our customers out in the field. I actually come from an operations background. For more than half my career, I was front of the house, back of the house, and non-commercial on college campuses across America. I was actually a catering manager at one point, so I really understand those pain points.
That seems so important to be able to really empathize and fully understand what it's like to walk in those shoes so that you can solve for what their needs are.
And that's really what we try to do, is bring solutions to the operators.
And I think it's interesting, too, because when people are thinking about their catering strategies, sometimes they can really quickly go to how are we going to drive demand or how am I going to be the top, choice against my competitors. And I think packaging is such a crucial part of that strategy, and it can sometimes get overlooked. I hate to say it, but it's the case.
Absolutely. The truth is that packaging and supply can often be an afterthought. And really needs to become part of the menu creation process, at least the tail end of the menu creation process. And here's the ugly truth. The food on demand opportunity is very exciting. It offers opportunity to expand into new concepts, expand into new customer segments. It can impact growth for everyone from an independent operator, an independent caterer, to national chains, right? But here's the sticking point. It also increases your exposed risk. So why is it exposed risk? It's exposed risk or increased risk because when it comes to delivery, we're shifting the accountability away from the customer, the consumer, and onto the operator. Because when it was takeout, it was a picked up catering order, you grabbed that bag, you grabbed that box, you transported it, you drove it. So if you bumped it, if you knocked it, if the food spilled, if the packaging cracked, you took some culpability. But with delivery, and especially third-party delivery, there's no more culpability on the consumer. It's falling back to the operator. So it's really critical to get the packaging right.
And we keep having this concept come up that there's a little bit of a lack of control as the food leaves off premises. And so instead, you're having a conversation of, maybe being a little more proactively controlling to invest in the right product, make sure that you find the right partner who's going to help you navigate your packaging needs. And we hear this all the time from our partners that they're either in a level of sophistication with their brand that they're looking to elevate their game, or they're fresh and starting out with their strategy and they don't even know where to begin. So what would you say to those partners who in the early stages of their brand and are really trying to create the right packaging strategy for their catering program?
So I think that depending upon what type of food you're working with, there's some things that travel well and some things that don't. So you may want to look at your menu and make sure that the items that you're choosing to offer for catering are ones that are going to hold up well. You want to look at, do you have the right ounce capacities of packaging for the number of people that are being served? You don't want to over portion, or because now you have to worry about food costs. You're giving too much food away. So there's a lot of things to consider. Are you such high volume that you have to prep the day before? You want to make sure you have the right material if it's going to need to be in the refrigerator overnight. Certain materials won't work as well as maybe a type of plastic container rather than a natural fiber does not work as well after it's sat in the refrigerator. How long a distance are you going to be driving that catering? Are you within a 30-mile? Are you going an hour? Is there an opportunity to reheat on the other end? Is there an oven, a microwave? Does that package packaging work in there. So there's a lot of things to think about. And I think if you find a packaging vendor that will help with a consultative approach and ask you all those questions, it really can put your mind at ease knowing that then you're choosing the right packaging for you, because every operator is different.
If you have a good packaging strategy, that helps reduce your risk over those things that you can't control. You mentioned, for example, once it leaves the door, I no longer have control. But if you chose the right packaging that keeps, for example, ingredients tight, a tight fit, reduce headroom, things like that, you're going to keep the ingredients from shifting. Therefore, it looks better and fresher once it arrives. This is just one example of why packaging is so important to break it down into practical application. The choice of packaging can make the difference between losing a half a degree of heat every minute while in transit or a full 2 degrees of heat every minute in transit. So if you think about a 15, 20 minute, sometimes 30-minute ride, add that up, how many degrees of heat you can lose if you don't choose the right packaging material.
Let alone, we used to find when we were in the restaurants that we were, having a hard time getting hot pizza out the door. And one of the things you would find is that, maybe that takeout specialist wasn't labeling it correctly. And so they were peeking inside of the box to constantly say, was this the pepperoni or was this another type of pizza? And just by opening that box and closing it, you were rapidly losing heat versus if you had followed procedure and kept it closed and labeled it correctly.
Absolutely. Every time you open a hot box, you're losing all that semen, all that heat. Anytime you open the refrigerator to check on that thing that one last time, you're raising the temperature, right? So it works both ways. So one of the things that we would advise is wherever possible, use a clarified clear lid so you have easy view for order accuracy, because order accuracy is a number one issue customer complaint with catered orders.
Speaking of the customer, you can learn so much from digging into what those customer insights are and what their expectation is. So, how do you take customer insights into account when you're developing out a strategy?
So we do a lot of research with consumers, a lot of consumer surveys, just kind of asking probing questions to understand. In a recent catering survey that we did with over 1,000 consumers, we wanted to know what was important to them if they were actually ordering, whether it be for their family and friends at home or at the office for their boss or some special guests that were going to be in attendance. And it was really that they looked good and they did a good job because they were really letting somebody else do that. They were putting their trust. So you need to, make sure you keep that trust with the customer. The customer doesn't mind paying a little bit more to have really great packaging because they want to be able to put it out on the table, serve out of that container. So, there are some materials that are a little bit nicer looking than others, and you might not want to put that on a buffet. So if you have something that's table ready, you can just take the lid off and it's all ready to go. I think that's really important and one of the consumer trends that we found, on top of wanting, the latest and greatest type of food that's out there.
Well, especially since you might be ordering from that same brand for a casual 7-person lunch, or that might be going in front of an executive board or clients that you're trying to impress. And so having packaging that truly makes a memorable impression and makes everyone look professional is appreciated across the board.
And this is what we have to remember. Consumers have food preferences. They actually really do have packaging preferences too. And this is what we study. We study packaging preferences. So here in America, Americans love their recyclable plastics and their compostable paper pulp products. So every time we do this survey, we get almost the same results. We see increase in the paper pulp side, but also the recyclable plastic is always number one. The least preferred packaging substrates are usually foam and aluminum. But yet in the catering world, aluminum is probably the most used substrate in the industry, even though it's not the most preferred. So it's really important to study the consumer and what they're looking for. And they're looking for packaging that maintains temperature. They're also looking for packaging that can be reused. A lot of these catering orders have leftovers. About 70% of every catered order has leftovers. And if you paid a couple $100s for that order, you don't want that food to go to waste. So you need to make sure you use packaging that's resealable. And also, here's a big one, that fits in the consumer's refrigerator or or that office refrigerator. These huge pans, we sell catering bowls, for example. I advise operators, don't buy my 360-ounce bowl, for 320-ounce bowl. Buy two 160-ounce bowls. You can stack them and they can fit in the refrigerator, and it's great for leftovers.
I also just like to think about, from the food safety perspective, a large pan that has been in a chafing rack for 30 minutes to an hour, and then someone's putting the lid back on and sticking it in the fridge and not allowing it time to cool. So, bacteria and things can grow. So by putting things in smaller containers, you're more apt to maybe finish one and then another one maybe is partially. And so there's not so much bulk in that one pan. Fits a little bit better in the fridge, as Nicole mentioned. And it would cool down a lot faster as well. So, because we don't want anybody getting sick either from the food that we're serving them.
I have to say that is such an interesting point that I haven't considered, especially when the majority of businesses are bringing in food for their teams so that there's higher productivity. People like working more. They spend more time, engaging at the office versus taking time to go out and get lunch. And meanwhile, if you give them food poisoning, that's not going to accomplish those goals. We hear from a lot of operations leaders that their restaurants or their units weren't necessarily set up for catering when they were originally built. And so it brings out this conversation of physical capacity. And with catering, you're competing for space and labor and equipment, and there's so many different things to consider. And unfortunately, sometimes that decision on packaging really just comes down to concerns around back of house storage and cost. And so I would, really beg to consider that there are a lot of other things that we have to think about in their packaging strategy for both the back of house and front of house.
Absolutely, Genevieve. And that's really why Sabert created the 360 approach, because there's so many components to consider when choosing packaging for catering. Temperature and the cooking technique of the food can change the requirement for packaging. Heat lamps, staging, multifunction for SKU utilization. Can we get SKU rationalization and use packaging that's good for hot and cold? Ease of transport, the heat on the height and the weight on the stack, headroom of the container, segregation of the components and the ingredients, tightness of the ingredients to ensure freshness, stack height and weight and fit in the bag, the consistency with the brand, and then that perceived value positioning are all very important to choosing packaging.
And that's just front of the house. So you have to think about the back of the house too. Do you have room in your storeroom to store larger cases for platters and bowls that are going to feed multiple people as opposed to that single serve for that takeout delivery? Does your kitchen have capacity? Do you have enough stove space, fryer space, oven space, plating space? Just looking at all the efficiencies that you have in the back of the house to be able to manage both your in-house dining as well as your off-premise dining. You really need to come because they're going to be competing for space. And if you want to see your catering sales grow, you need to be as efficient as possible.
I think it's really interesting, this concept of 360 packaging strategy, because so many operators can get really deep in the weeds because you're, day to day deep in it, trying to make sure that you can keep your business alive. And so I think going through this practice, whether you're just starting your business or whether you're looking to elevate the sophistication of your catering program, to step back and really holistically look at your business from this 360 approach, because we hear these trends and concerns about physical capacity and restaurants that are not built for catering. And you're thinking about, how do I keep hot food hot, cold food cold? What is that experience when they're interacting with that packaging, either inside the four walls for takeout or as they go outside the four walls, all the way to when it's in that consumer's hand? Do you see certain brands really innovating in this packaging space to have it be a direct impact on creating a phenomenal guest experience?
Yes, we absolutely do. And I'll give you an example. Last year, about this time, we launched a product with a national account customer of ours. They came to us months before that. We were actually working on some innovation, and what they were looking for, we were able to provide them a solution. And when they implemented, they have a lot of different types of appetizers and things that they sell, but they needed a new container that was really going to showcase them in a way that it wasn't just kind of like flat on the table. They wanted a little bit of height. So we were working on a 2-tiered platter that would allow them to put hot food on the bottom, could be hot food on the top or cold food on the top, some of the dips and sauces. And so when they launched this out, and they did a really incredible job on their social media platforms, but their catering sales grew by 20%.
That's ridiculous.
No, I mean, really, we were keeping track of how they were doing, and it was just a really great exercise and new innovation and how this customer is willing to use that.
I just think that 20% growth, like, you can't argue with that. At the end of the day, they made an investment in mixing up their packaging, and they put a lot of emphasis behind getting the word out that things were a little different in their neck of the woods, and the consumer responded.
Packaging is definitely a financial decision for sure. It's a cost, but it's also potentially a growth decision too. It can really expand the opportunity for the operator if they make the right decision. Being in the industry for almost 20 years now, probably the most common question I get asked is, what should my packaging budget even be? And I know a lot of operators really struggle with that. They don't know what they should be spending, what's appropriate, what's inappropriate. And some of it depends a bit on the brand. It's got to match the brand. But Technomic really helps us with this. They put out a packaging budget. And generally what they find is 6 to 8% of menu price should go back into packaging. It's definitely higher on the catering side, lower on, say, the QSR side of the industry. But catering, we tend to see anywhere from 6 to even upwards of 12% of that menu price go back into the packaging. So let me just break that down practically. What does that look like? So if a typical catering order, let's just say, is $180, then the packaging budget should be between about $7 and $14 in order to extend that dining experience to the customer outside the four walls.
What will make a customer be willing to spend a little bit more money for that packaging? Because that is a pretty big range, and it seems like some consumers don't mind taking on that extra cost.
Well, Data Essentials helped us answer that question with a recent study where they showed that consumers are generally willing to spend more if the packaging is resaleable and reusable, because remember, 70% of those catering orders have leftovers. So if I can get the full value in having resaleable packaging. And then the other thing is sustainability. If you're offering packaging that's either compostable, biodegradable, made from renewable resources, or on the other side of the spectrum, made from recycled content, consumers increasingly care about the sustainability of the package.
We really do hear both consumers and our restaurant and food service partners talking about this concept of sustainability so much. What are those other key trends that we should all keep an eye out for in the upcoming years?
Yeah, so sustainability is probably number one on that list, but there's a lot of other trends that consumers are looking for. They're looking for transparency in the packaging. Where is it coming from? How is it being made? And what do I do with it once I'm done with it? Can I recycle it? Is it compostable? They want a good value, appealing packaging, and they want the food to arrive cold if it's supposed to be cold and hot if it's supposed to be hot.
Hot food, hot.
And there's things that consumers want specific to packaging too. They're looking that the food taste remains consistent along the lines of temperature, but also that it doesn't spill, it doesn't leak, it doesn't drip. It maintains that temperature. It's easy to transport. It's easy to serve from, and that it looks really great and high quality.
You can compare it to, say you're at home and you're ordering delivery from one of your favorite restaurants, and it shows up and it's just not quite the way it is when you have it in the restaurant. The catering experience should be exactly the same. So if they're a frequent guest at your restaurant and now they order catering from you, that chicken or that vegetable or that dessert, whatever the item is, should taste and look exactly the same.
Or you look at it as a marketing campaign and you make that one connection with the decision maker, and suddenly, I don't know, 200 people might be trying your food who never knew that it existed. So
Absolutely.
there's, on the one hand, the people who could get let down from what they know you usually offer, but they might still have some trust in you. The people who are getting introduced to your brand for the first time, you have an opportunity to fuel your brick and mortar business, to fuel the other areas of your off-premises channels. But if it doesn't look great and it didn't taste great, God, you miss an opportunity.
And that's why the goal of packaging is to extend that dining experience, to try to get the experience as close as possible to what it is on premise as off premise, which is difficult to do. It's never going to be perfect, but with the right packaging, it can help. And the consumer understands that to a degree, to a point. And then there's a point at which the patience falls off, right? So we have to find that best case scenario for controlling the situation. And one point to really understand to help you choose the right packaging is that 24% of orders are eaten immediately. Only 24% of orders are eaten immediately. So the grand majority sit and wait and lose temperature. So how do we lose the least amount of temperature as possible? And you can control that situation by choosing the right substrate for the food application.
Yeah, because maybe that you have the ability to reheat something in your office with a microwave, and the type of packaging that you choose, maybe it's microwavable, but maybe it's not. So then everybody has to have cold food. So you want to consider that as well for your customers.
I would love to hear just what are those few takeaways that if you were to give any final advice for those who aren't able to work and partner directly with you, what would your final thoughts be for our listeners?
So these are just some really quick tips and tricks for restaurant operators. If you take away nothing else, take away the idea that clarity of lids helps improve order accuracy. If you're using a clear lid, you can see the food, you know it's right, you don't open it up and lose that temperature. Reducing the headroom, the extra room in a package, if we can keep those ingredients tight, it's going to look and stay fresher. When the customer first sees it, they're going to want to eat it with their eyes right away, right? The ease of resealable lids so that the leftovers can be utilized and the consumer feels that they get a good value. If you want to take it up a notch, here's one quick tip. Try to keep your packaging look consistent. Choose one material type, one color, one shape, to keep it with a consistent look so it doesn't look so mix and match. And that's going to improve your brand perception in the market.
I think one of a couple of things that I'd like to mention, because this happens all the time when we order things at our office. Don't forget the forks, knives, spoons, and napkins. And I think having a checklist to make sure you have all of those items. You've left your facility, you're going to the drop off the catering, and you remembered everything and it's on the checklist. And last but not least, label the food so people know what it is when they open it.
Because even a smaller operator who maybe doesn't have as large of a budget can still make a really strong commitment to having a great packaging program. And I think no matter what, we all agree that it truly impacts the guest.
Absolutely.
And if you can grow your sales by 20%,
it's worth the effort.
Yeah, that's a winning story for
absolutely.
Sure. All right. Well, Nicole and Susan, thank you so much for joining us. And thanks to the folks at Sabert. It's been so great to hear your insights and data and perspectives on packaging in the industry. And we're all really excited to see where this segment grows in the next few years.
Thanks, Genevieve.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for listening to the Catering Feed, powered by EasyCater.